and I must admit it was pretty disappointing when I finally actually got round to playing the awful Saturn's port of the classic arcade game Mortal Kombat II. In fact, this port, Mortal Kombat 2, shares quite a similarity with our last gaming nightmare, the Sega Saturn's port of Doom, in that it's an iconic game that has effectively been butchered by the developers of the time. Now, some of you may be wondering exactly what went wrong. Indeed, I'm slightly baffled as myself how a 1993 Midway-based arcade game was released on a much higher spec machine than any of the other previous ports, and yet still somehow managed to be arguably and probably the worst port of the entire console, give or take the PlayStation or 32X version. Although, to be fair, the PlayStation version is based pretty much on the Saturn's code, and appears to have been a slightly earlier release, but the PlayStation release bizarrely was only ever released in Japan, despite the fact that most Mortal Kombat games never actually got released in Japan. The PlayStation version did, but only in Japan, which is a bit weird. So yes, we're going to be talking about the Sega Saturn's release of Mortal Kombat 2. Now, by all accounts, from what I've gathered up and researching it, it appears the main reason for why this port was so bad was simply because Acclaim were actually running out of the license when they did this port. It was a bit of a rush job at the time, by all accounts, as Midway rapidly took back over the porting rights, but they snuck out this, what can be described as dreadful port of Mortal Kombat 2 just before they lost the license. Now, on first glance, the port actually appears to be the most faithful of every single port. Indeed, on first glance you would say, hey, that looks just like the arcade game, with some slight minor reductions. Indeed, the visuals appear to have been directly taken from the arcade game, with a few minor slight changes due to the resolution of the Saturn compared to the arcade game. But it does, in still frames, look like you're playing an arcade game. Unless, of course, you're using Shang Tsung, but we'll come to that a bit later.
Fatality.
But unfortunately, while the visuals may look about the same as the arcade game, as soon as you listen to the soundtrack, you'll know exactly what's wrong. In fact, the opening intro alone is where the first problems begin to appear. The original arcade soundtrack is noticeably missing during the opening intro. Instead, you get a slightly different, weaker song in the background. And then the intro just cuts as well all of a sudden. Half the intro is actually cut, because in the arcade version, upon the intro finishing the little background of Shang Tsung and Shao Kahn, it then goes, and now the combat continues, followed by a brief selection of fight sequences. This has been cut.
Outstanding.
Unfortunately, it appears whoever did the sound forgot to actually include half the soundtrack. It's like they had the soundtrack from the arcade game. It's like, oh, I meant to include it, but I didn't, because almost all the sound effects from the arcade game are missing, including almost all the voice calls for the characters upon selecting them winning matches. Even things like flawless and double flawless victory are missing entirely. It's like the sound guy was on a day off when they were compiling the last build, and he's like, oh, we should have included all those sound effects. But half the sound effects are missing, and those that are included are often slightly muffled and just don't sound right. The in-game music sounds decent enough, but it's a long way off arcade perfect, and for a Sega Saturn CD-based audio system, you expect a perfect rendition of every single song and soundtrack in the game. And this is just the icing on the cake compared to all the other problems. It is a truly woeful port that I'm thankful I never got to play till late on in, I think we picked this up in around about 2000, 2001, long after we played the SNES port to death, which is a much better port than this one. So on top of the intro cut, perhaps biggest sin, and if you can imagine if this was in a Street Fighter game, what the outrage is that every time you do the first special move of the map, the game pauses to load in that special move and all the other character special moves. That's right, every time. And not only that, it's each character. So each time they do their special move, as you'll see from this nice little collage video, some of the loading effects, there is a pause as each loads in the first special move. Now, it only occurs once at the start of the match whenever any character uses their special move, but it's such irritating. Could you imagine Street Fighter? Ryu did a Hadouken and then pause midway through the Hadouken for a few seconds to start it up. And that's exactly what happens in this. It is woeful. This is a core-breaking issue in a fighting game. Why would you have a slow pause upon doing the first special move? This should have been optimized so it didn't occur, but it wasn't. And it's just game-breaking. It's absolutely game-breaking. And you get this woeful stutter. And it goes on and on. Every match does this. It's once you've done your first special move, you're fine, but your opponent, as soon as they do their first special move, also does a load. So you can get double load pretty simple. But it just completely breaks up the flow of a fighting game and causes all sorts of input issues for the other player while it's loading, because the pause comes completely unexpectedly, because you don't know when the other player is going to do their first special move. Added to this, that some of the sound effects are missing, and often the sound effects aren't right when you're doing this move either. It's just an awful, awful example of how not to port a game. Now, the next huge issue with this is Shang Tsung. Now, okay, because this is a CD-based system and not a cartridge-based one, you would expect a slight load for when Shang Tsung has the morph option. Indeed, the game itself in the option menu grants you 3 states of Shang Tsung. Load, which is load anyone. Mirror match, so it can only load the character you're fighting or morph into him. And then there's one option that completely prevents Shang Tsung from morphing into anyone. Now, you would have thought that the load option would basically just pause the game when it does this. No, it appears the game was so badly optimized that the game still runs real time as you're loading rather than pausing it. But to add to this, if you have the load options on for Shang Tsung, the game actually lowers the resolution of the characters for the duration of the fight. That's right, there's actually 2 resolutions. Basically, if you have the full load on, Shang Tsung will actually appear weaker resolution, as you can see now. And any of his opponents, and this goes all the way up to Shao Kahn and Kintaro, will become a pixelated mess while fighting Shang Tsung. As you can see, it just looks awful, and you can't believe that a game of this caliber, why does it suddenly need to have this? There's no clear reason why the resolution change either.
Fight.
Especially seeing they could have just done a pause. But the morph itself is even weird, because the morph, although it triggers a load, still acts in real time. So you get, as you can see here from this fight here where we're doing the morphs and fighting, it becomes really hard to actually play because it's like pausing but still running at the same time. Often trying to pull the morphs, the AI will do moves while you're actually doing it, and you won't see any of the frames of animation, you'll just suddenly get impacted. It's just astoundingly bad. In short, because it doesn't pause the game, any fight that you use Shang Tsung and morph in will just be stuttering and jerky throughout the duration of the entire fight, just rendering the whole match unplayable. And this just completely breaks up. If you're a Shang Tsung player, again I am, it just renders the game completely unplayable. Now, I expected a pause to occur. Indeed, even almost every later Mortal Kombat either had to pause on the CD basis, had to pause when Shang Tsung was changing character, or as in the most recent games on the Xbox One and the PS4, or even the last one, Mortal Kombat 9, they just prevented Shang Tsung from morphing into any other opponent. A bit of a disappointment. I don't know quite why Edie Boon and the guys at NetherRealm don't just instead change it so that Shang Tsung, while he's morphing, goes into a sort of state. So you have to play as this weird like morphing state until it can load in the character, and that would probably work a lot better, but they haven't. They've just done it so in the later games you can only morph into one character or not at all in some of them. It's just really bad that they've done this in Mortal Kombat 2, and so it renders the game basically in a Shang Tsung match. You either have to turn the morphing off and make Shang Tsung practically nerfed, although his free fireballs were still incredibly powerful, or you just have to put up with this resolution and constant loading, and not just constant loading, really bad loading. It doesn't pause the game, and this is just infuriating. It shows you a completely unoptimized coding, and you do have to wonder quite how bad Acclaim were at this time when they had to rush out the port before release. Now, added to this is you would expect the Saturn's port, despite the fact it was rushed out, to be nigh on perfect, at least in content. The problem is it isn't, and I know from testing it and actually playing it. Now, I was a big arcade fan, a big fan of Mortal Kombat 2 on the Super Nintendo. We did everything. Every little trick, super. We even did a little guidebook back in the day to show you everything. Everything from the Johnny Cage 3 head punches to, of course, the Kentaro morph, the Shang Tsung as a bonus fatality, the babalities, the other things like the spike pull drop if you held down on the sticks. And the reason I'm mentioning a couple of those is because the Kentaro morph for Shang Tsung, based on me practicing countless times now to reproduce it, is actually missing from the Sega Saturn version. So the Shang Tsung Kentaro morph fatality is actually missing, and there's no way to pull it off. I could not pull it off despite me trying. Now, some of you might say, well, you're probably just rubbish at doing the fatalities. Well, here's the thing. I tested it straight after on two of the arcade versions, one on the Mortal Kombat Arcade Collection and on the arcade version on main, and both times I pulled it off first time. By all accounts, it's missing in the Saturn's version, or they've changed the button press. Either way, and I've not found any other sites, even the Mortal Kombat sites, because clearly basically no one's ever played the Saturn's port, because even though it was quite a late release, it's actually quite a limited port. And although the PlayStation version is incredibly hard to get hold of, the Saturn's version isn't that much more commoner, and because of that, barely anyone's actually played it. So all these Mortal Kombat sites probably have never actually played the Saturn's version, so I think I'm the first person to find out that the Kentaro morph is actually missing. Now, either it's buggy or they've changed the button prompt. I did try a few other button prompts and could not get it to work. In case you're wondering, the Kentaro morph, you're supposed to hold down low punch for 25 seconds in the final round of the fight and then release it in sweep distance to trigger the fatality. The other thing missing, and this is definitely missing for sure, is if you're in the tomb, you can uppercut the enemy into the spikes as a fatality. What you could do cheekily in the arcade, and this works in the SNES version, was if you had two joypads plugged in and you both held down as soon as you did the uppercut, instead of sticking to the spikes, the dead opposition opponent's body would slide off them rather comically. This is also missing from the Saturn's version. Sadly, as you can see from this video, the actual dun 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 fatality music is also conveniently missing thanks to the various sound glitches present in this game. So none of that, there's just a really nasty load followed by the fatality. Indeed, the loading in and out of matches is pretty horrendous to say the least. Added to this, of course, Smoke, one of the more annoying secret characters I have been unable to access. Now, he might still be in the game, but Dan Fortune, the old Mr. Toasty man as he comes out, Toasty, is incredibly rare to appear in the Saturn's version. In the arcade version, usually if two players basically uppercutted each other for the whole, but all 3 rounds, you'd usually get him to appear once. That doesn't appear to be the case on this version, and it appears to be slightly preset or random in a way that I can't quite figure out. But basically, I've been only able once to get Dan Fortune to pop up in the portal to summon Smoke, and when I did, I pressed down and start and it paused the game. Now, that's not an indication that the cheat doesn't work. I might have not been slow enough, but so far I've not been able to get it to work. And when I did press down and start, it immediately brought up the quit menu and press and quit out of the menu, so I was slightly annoyed at that. Now, I know the arcade version on a certain few re-releases was actually missing the smoke warp, which is actually a common bug in a few releases where they didn't properly set up the start button so you couldn't access it. Noticeably, the Midway collections were missing it on the PS2, as was the version in Shaolin Monks. That was actually a surprisingly good beat 'em up based on the Mortal Kombat 2 storyline. That was also missing the ability to fight Smoke in the game because start was not mapped correctly. It was mapped to the game setup and not the original arcade setup where you had to press down and start to fight Smoke in the portal just as Mr. Toasty Man appears. Okay, so as you can tell from this later footage just now, I did actually eventually manage to get to Smoke. However, that was due to the fact I was using the debug cheat, which enabled you to access smoke and also permanently bring up Dan Fordoon after every uppercut. And there is actually a bug with smoke. I discovered that Dan Fordoon does not appear in single player. If you have the toasty cheat on, I noticed he will not appear in the single player on the portal stage no matter what. He will appear on every other stage, but if you're playing single player, he will not appear, even if you have this toasty cheat on that brings him up after every uppercut. Hence why I was only able to actually eventually reach smoke in 2-player, because you cannot get to him in single player. So that's actually quite a nasty bug there, but as you can see from this footage, I did actually get to smoke and fight him. But yes, another glitch and another unreported thing on the internet. You can only get to smoke on the Sega Saturn version if you're playing 2-player. Dan Fordoon does not appear otherwise. He'll appear on every other stage, but not that stage in single player. For some reason it just glitched. Finally, my other slight gripe is there's no save for the options, but overall the sound alone and the loading just renders this port virtually unplayable. Seriously, you put on the SNES version and you get a near perfect port. While not quite looking as graphically as good, the SNES version is just a wonderful port. This, however, is a diabolical, just horrible mess. And to add to this, the actual guys developing it clearly thought they did quite a good job, because they stuck all their faces in the credit list. This is my favourite Mortal Kombat arcade game, probably up until Mortal Kombat 9, which I think was a really good re-envisioning, but Mortal Kombat 2 was a classic game. It blew away Street Fighter 2 in the arcades at the time because that had become quite dated, and it was just phenomenal. Huge crowds when it first came out. Everyone enjoyed playing it. And for this to be treated in such a manner by Acclaim on a system that's more powerful and released 2 years after the original arcade release back in 93, the Saturn of course released in 95 in Europe, 94 in Japan, but for this more powerful system to get such a bad conversion because it was so badly rushed, it's just unexcusable. Quite frankly, there are no excuses for this. Admittedly, I'm sure some people will be going, why are you playing Mortal Kombat anyway? Because I don't like it. Well, tough, I really enjoy Mortal Kombat. So what should you have been playing on the Sega Saturn if you're a Mortal Kombat fan and didn't want to play this rubbish conversion? Well, there are actually 2 Mortal Kombat conversions well worth playing. First off is Eurocom's port of the arcade release of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, which was a really enjoyable port and incredibly close to the original arcade. In fact, by all accounts, it's got all the arcade animation, it's got all the speed, the load times are nowhere near as bad. It only loads if you're using Shang Tsung, and you can again turn that feature on and off if you want to morph in. And it's basically a near perfect port. It's got all the visuals, it's got all the, as far as I'm aware, it's not missing any animation. And it's actually probably the closest home port of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 that isn't using an emulator. My one gripe is there's no save, so each time you have to put in, there's a cheat which is put crazy Cyrax, you have to type that in via the joypad on the Mortal Kombat title, well, the Ultimate logo screen, and then that way you can unlock all the characters. But aside from that, as you can see from this video, it's incredibly close to Mortal Kombat, and it's a really enjoyable port. It's just great, it's just perfect. There's just no complaints about it, and it's a brilliantly good port. It's slightly probably better than the Mortal Kombat Trilogy port that I'm about to speak about, because it's using slightly better resolution and stuff, and it's a slightly cleaner port. But it's by far the best port of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. I mean, the DS has a very good port, but I much prefer playing it on the big screen, not the small one. Aside from arcade emulation, you won't find a better port of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 than the Saturn's one. So my last choice is, of course, the superb Mortal Kombat Trilogy, and that's a variant on Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, but with all the characters. Admittedly, this version on the Saturn is clearly a port of the PlayStation code, so the resolution is actually slightly lower, although it's tough to notice, but I noticed it myself when I'm comparing the two while doing this video. Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 on the Saturn has every single Mortal Kombat character in it, and is well worth playing. It's really, really good fun if you're a fan of the series, because it was like a homage and a sort of waving goodbye to the old sort of acted version of the series before they did the 3D versions in Mortal Kombat 4. It's not perfect, and the one problem with the PAL version is that the PAL version is actually the rarest game in Europe because it was, well, we're not sure if it was officially released or not. You see, when I was Saturn at the time, we could never find a copy. Now, we're not sure because the Saturn's version came out a year later after the PlayStation version, whether most shops just didn't carry it at the time because they thought it had already been released, or they just didn't think it would sell. Or it had been recalled because some people suggested it had been recalled. Whatever the way, the PAL version unfortunately is incredibly hard to get hold of, and it's going to set you back a pretty penny. But it's a great port, and as you can see from here, I really enjoy playing as characters like Goro and Kintoro. It was, however, released in the US and is much more commoner in the US. If you ever fancied the smackdown between Johnny Cage and Shiva from Mortal Kombat 3, or Goro versus Montoro in a revenge match, it's all there. Every character's there. It's just great fun and just really good. It was a great homage to Mortal Kombat and a great send-off for the 32-bit era. Unlike this woeful Mortal Kombat 2 port. So are there any pluses for Mortal Kombat 2? Well, it looks like the arcade game when you're not playing as Shang Tsung, but aside from that, it's absolutely dreadful. Now, a few people I have seen say this is such a really bad port, and I can categorically say, because even I've seen a few websites say, oh, it's actually quite a good port. It's not, it's terrible. The loading is awful. The mid-loading and the fireball loading is just game-breakingly bad. And as I said, if they did this in Street Fighter, there would be uproar. And basically everyone I've ever seen review the Saturn's port. Some people have often said, oh, it's not that, it's quite a good port. No, it's not. You can see from this video, from all the pausing, no port is this good. Even the blooming Mega Drive version's better than this port. This is woeful. What you should have been playing it is playing Mortal Kombat 2 on the SNES, or MAME, or the recent MK Arcade Collection. In the end, this is one port of Mortal Kombat 2 that Acclaim appear to have fatalitied themselves before they even ever released it into the shop.
Is that your best?